Good morning and welcome to this month's meeting of the California State Board of Food and Agriculture. We're very happy that you're here and we'd like to begin today's meeting. In order to do so, would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Josh, would you please call the roll?
Rochelle Arizmendi,
Present.
Ashley Bourne, Don Bransford, Don Cameron, here. Nancy Cassidy, Helene Dillard, Ben Drake, here. Mike Gallo, Crystal Haling, here. Eric Holst, Bryce Lumberg, yes. Craig McNamara,
Here.
Martha Montoya, Joyce Sturley, Andy Thulin. Here. Mr. President, we have a quorum.
Good, and I know that Ashley will be joining us, I believe Martha as well.
As well as Joy.
Good, so we're in good stead there. The minutes from our November 7th meeting were electronically sent out to you all. If there's no additions or deletions, I would suggest that they be moved.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Great, thank you very much. Abstain? Oh, okay, thank you for that, Ben. Our secretary will be joining us momentarily. I think we should begin with the important topic of this morning's panel presentation. I'd like to invite our two panelists, Richard Perot and Hezekiah Allen, to join us, please. And let me introduce you properly, both of you. Come on up. Richard is the director of CDFA's Cal Cannabis Cultivation Licensing Division. As the director, Richard oversees the implementation of the cultivation, licensing, compliance, and enforcement programs for medicinal and adult use cannabis. He has over 30 years of state government experience, primarily working for the State Board of Equalization, overseeing the administration of 30 different tax and fee programs. So we're very happy to have you join us this morning, Richard, and you told me that you just made that switch to CDFA in August. Great. Hezekiah, we're very happy to have you back. You've been a member coming before us many times over the last several years. Hezekiah serves as the executive director of the California Growers Association. He was born and raised off the grid in rural Humboldt County. Hezekiah is an active community leader for the cannabis community in which he was raised. Through lobbying and public affairs programs, Hezekiah works to protect the interests of a broad statewide membership made up of several hundred growers and business owners. Richard, if you would like to begin this morning's panel, we're very happy to have you do so.
Good morning, President McNamara, Secretary Ross, and members of the board. Thank you for having me here today, and thank you for the introduction. I'd like to begin by just giving a brief update regarding the emergency regulations for the cultivation licensing program. I gave this similar update at the Cannabis Advisory meeting back on November 16th when the emergency regulations were released. So the regulations are divided into, or organized by 7 different articles as follows. We have articles that touch on definitions, the application process, licensing, site-specific requirements, record keeping and the track and trace system, and then finally inspections and enforcement. So briefly what I'll do is just talk about some high-level items that are noteworthy from the differences from the medicinal regulations that were the draft medical regulations that had been put out earlier in the year back in April of this year. So canopy, the definition of canopy has been revised to clarify that non-contiguous areas with identifiable boundaries may be included in the canopy calculation. This will allow spaces in between canopy areas to be eliminated from the calculation, and we've provided in the regulations examples of identifiable boundaries. For mixed light, based on industry practices, we've created 2 tiers for the mixed light category to differentiate between farmers that use supplemental versus high-intensity light in a greenhouse or hoop house setting. Temporary licenses, we have a section in there that talks about what is required for an applicant to apply for a temporary license. They, based on changes to law, applicants for a temporary license must present a local permit license or authorization in order to be considered for a temporary license, along with a few other items that are spelled out in the regulations. Application fees. These are listed in the emergency regulations. The department will be charging a non-refundable application fee to apply for a cultivation license. Let me stress that there is no fee for temporaries, so this application fee is for the annual license. The fees have, we've updated our fee schedule based on current known existing costs to the department, and the application fees were scaled based on the average annual production of the license type. For cannabis waste management, we updated the waste management requirements in consultation with Cal Recycle to be consistent with current state laws and regulations for waste handling, and specifically removed the requirement of rendering cannabis prior to disposal and clarified the requirements for on-site composting using a waste hauler or self-hauling. The applicant track and trace training requirements. The temporary licensees will not be using the track and trace system. The regulations specify what temporary licensees must do. They will move product using paper invoices and manifests, and the regulations clearly specify what information must be contained on those receipts or manifests. However, at the time a temporary licensee applies for their annual license, within 10 days of receiving notice that their complete application has been received by the department, the licensee must register for state training for the track and trace system. There's no fees associated with that track and trace training. Additionally, with the track and trace system, the immature plants can be, plants will need to be identified in the track and trace system. Cultivators can have lots of up to 100 immature plants. That lot will be identified with a unique identifier for that lot of plants. And each plant within the lot will be labeled with a label that matches that unique identifier. When the plants enter the flowering stage, each individual plant will need to have its own unique identifier that associates back to the lot where that plant came from. Annual license fees, we've updated our fee schedules. We will be charging a fee for the annual license. That fee schedule is also based on current known existing costs to the department, and the license fees were scaled based on the average annual production of the license type. And I touched on the track and trace system already. Renewable energy requirements. Initially in the medicinal regs, we had renewable energy requirements that started right at the beginning of the year. That we've modified those now to allow a phase-in period. So beginning in 2022, licensees will need to provide details regarding energy use and sources. And then beginning in 2023, licensees will need to meet the average electricity greenhouse gas emissions intensity required of their local utility provider. Generator requirements. Previously, there was a ban on generators. In the emergency regulations, we've modified them, specifying applicable generator types and requirements for allowable generator use based on the comments that we had received. And then finally, a medium cultivation license limits. The Medicinal and Adult Use Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act charged CDFA with imposing a limit on the number of medium-sized cannabis cultivation licenses. Our emergency regulations limit a person to one medium-sized license, either type A for adult use or M for medicinal. To address the concern of industry consolidation, the Act also prohibits the issuance of large licenses until January 1st, 2023. The CDFA's emergency regulations do not provide for a cumulative canopy limit for licensees who wish to hold multiple licenses, with the exception of the limit of the one medium license. There's no requirement in the Act for a cap on total canopy for licensees who wish to hold multiple licenses. Therefore, local jurisdictions will maintain control over any size or license limitations they deem appropriate. This respect for local control is supported by Business and Professions Code 26055D, which states, licensing authorities shall not approve an application for a state license under this division if approval of the state license will violate the provisions of any local ordinance or regulation adopted in accordance with Section 26200. The state will defer to the local jurisdiction with regard to the total canopy limits in that jurisdiction. In closing, I do want to state that the emergency regulations comment period closed yesterday, and the emergency regulations are still undergoing review by the Office of Administrative Law. Additionally, we are holding licensee training workshops right now. Attendees must register to secure a spot for these workshops. Details are on our website. And just to name the remaining locations for everyone, today we have 2 trainings that are happening, one in Fresno and one in Ukiah. On Thursday, December 7th, we'll be in Palm Desert and Oakland. And then next Tuesday, December 12th, we will be in Oroville. And then on Thursday, December 14th, we'll be in Eureka. And then we'll also be holding more licensee training workshops in 2018. And then there will be track and trace training that will be starting up in January with high-level overview trainings. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions from the board.
Thank you, Richard. I think we'll take Hezekiah's presentation, and then we'll ask questions of both of you at one time. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, Mr. President, Secretary, members of the board. I want to just start out by thanking you, Josh, especially for making the time available to have this conversation today. It's great to be here again. Richard, thank you for your comments, and to open, thank the department, Cal Cannabis in specific, for everything they've done to get us to this point. This really is a Herculean effort, an amazing lift over a very short period of time. You might not guess it from looking at the headlines, or it's counterintuitive, but the truth of the matter is we've got more growers in this state ready to come forward than any other cannabis business type. We've got a long line. 3 years ago, nobody would have guessed that. To have multiple thousands, 3, maybe 4,000 folks that are probably ready to get those licenses in the first few months of the year is truly an accomplishment, and I attribute it primarily to the work that Cal Cannabis and your department has done to engage folks, to do the outreach. The outreach meetings that Richard mentioned are the latest in several waves. These guys have been all over the state working really hard for 2 years, and a lot of good has come from that. The revisions that we've seen from the medical regs in April to the recent emergency regs, you couldn't even begin to list the positive progress that's been made. Generator requirements, the licensing fees, temporary licensing phase-in. This is not a simple or straightforward public policy challenge, and your staff have really risen to that challenge and are, in almost every way, we're on the same page. It's probably no surprise that with anything this monumental, it couldn't be perfect. And so, I want to speak to the one issue that really does have our members particularly concerned. And, I'll summarize that concern. There's about 25 pages of signatures here. It's about 2,900 of our members. Best as I can tell, about 700 of them are growers that will be seeking licenses. So we've got some other folks that are just supporters, but I'm just going to read it to you and then talk a little bit more about the context of the contents of this letter. It's very short. Dear friends, neighbors, and community members, it's a well-known fact that California is an agricultural powerhouse. We supply the nation and the world with hundreds of agricultural products. One of them is cannabis. Unlike every other crop, cannabis can only be legally sold in California. This is a significant challenge for everyone, from farmers to policymakers. The challenges of regulating cannabis will be much more severe if we open the floodgates to large-scale mega grows too quickly. That is why the state legislature did not include licenses larger than 1 acre in the MMRSA in 2015 or the MCRSA in 2016. That is why Prop 64 delayed the issuance of large-scale licenses until 2023. And that's why the agency's own environmental impact report didn't consider grows larger than 1 acre. For these reasons, we support policies that would restrict each business to a maximum of 1 acre of cultivation until 2023. So this letter doesn't come in a vacuum. We've been doing this for a couple years now, and this has certainly been a topic of a fair amount of controversy. There are two different visions of cannabis regulation and cannabis cultivation in California. There's one that's inspired the interest and excitement on Wall Street and in the investment community, and we're seeing millions of dollars flow into our community with all the pros and cons. Certainly not here to say that's a bad thing. And then we also have several tens of thousands of folks all over the state. Here in the room today, we've got members from Sonoma, Nevada, Mendocino, Humboldt, Monterey, goodness, probably a few other counties. We did ask that not all 3,000 of them show up today, and so we just asked for a representative sample, and we are going to keep comments real focused and succinct out of respect for time. But just wanted to show you that on the other side of this vision of growth and of who's going to be the first cannabis billionaire and all of these questions that I hear out there on the conferences, there's also tens of thousands of families that are trying to make a living, that are trying to keep their farms in operation. I know that you know it, and I know it, and we all know it. Small farms are good for California. There's just no two ways about that. And cannabis is such a unique opportunity because we currently have so many tens of thousands of farmers working in this space that I think it warrants special consideration. I know that this is not a typical policy. I know that a limitation on scale is not something that we see standard in the rest of agriculture, but neither is licensure. And so the regulate this like agriculture argument does start to break down a bit when we remember that one underlying fundamental truth, that this is a federally controlled substance, that our marketplace is constrained artificially by public policy. And public policy makers, in our opinion, have a responsibility to embrace that unique circumstance. By the department's own estimates, the state of California is currently producing about 16 million pounds of cannabis. We have the potential to consume 2.5, maybe 3 or 4 million of them. In 2014, when I sold my ranch and moved down here, something big had happened. For the first time ever, the law enforcement community and the local government community crossed over and was supporting a regulation bill. They were supporting it based on a provision that would have limited the number of licenses issued in the state. From our perspective, that would have been very problematic. We've seen Canada embrace the same policy in the last few years. They've been on a very similar parallel trajectory, and they embraced the policy that California legislature was considering in 2014. They have 34 licensees that will be supplying their entire federal marketplace. Very similar population, for all practical purposes, a pretty good parallel to the state of California. They've got not quite as many growers as we do that are left out in the cold, but they are facing some very, very severe social challenges as an existing community of growers is essentially being left behind. So in 2014, that was the policy. We have to limit supply. Let's limit the number of people that can grow it. We countered and said, what if we let everybody grow some, but asked everybody to grow a bit less for a few years? What if we took some time to get to know each other, to grow into regulation, and ultimately, until the market normalizes, we are going to have to be attentive to the fact that whether it's, almonds, olives, grapes, whatever it is, we're sending it everywhere around the world. And until we can do that with this product, we have a very, very strained market condition. That said, we are here ultimately to request that the department consider changing the emergency regulations, including this limitation. We think that the current regulations are unconstitutional, that they are inconsistent with the intent of Prop 64 that was amended on the December filing date. We think that the current emergency regulations are illegal. They are inconsistent with the department's EIR. The EIR did not pay window dressing to a 1 acre cap. We've found over a dozen references to the policy throughout the document where different impacts weren't considered based on this policy. And at the end of the day, we don't think that it's fair. We think that this lack of regulation is inconsistent with the spirit of fairness that our government should be governing with. We think that our community was promised this. We fought hard for it over several years. And at the end of the day, without 5 years, that's all this is. This is a 5-year delay until 2023. These aren't criminals. These aren't folks that are trying to skirt the law. These aren't even folks that want an unfair, as some people suggest it is, unfair advantage in the market. It's just a transition period. Of the counties I mentioned earlier, only 3 of them currently have permits. We don't just have to get a state license, we also have to get a local permit. For the dozen or so counties that don't have legislative staff working with their supervisors that have been pushing through this slow-moving quagmire to get a local ordinance on the table, this 5-year window was a real lifeline. This was keeping people's morale up. This was keeping them positive, keeping them focused. I've had over a dozen conversations with people that are going back to the black market. They've sold their permitted property. They've bought another one. They're out. There is a real feeling of bad faith, of bait and switch. This policy is something that we fought hard for. It's something that our state needs and deserves in order to get this right. And with all due respect, implore you to do whatever you can to restore this policy before the beginning of the new year. I'll just add that we've seen a number of capital stakeholders come out in support of this policy. The Teamsters Public Affairs Council, the rural county representatives of California, haven't seen it in writing, but it's been confirmed that CSAC is moving in this direction. League of Cities, police chiefs, recently Senators McGuire and Assemblymember Wood reiterated their support for this policy. This isn't something coming out of nowhere. This has been a bedrock policy over the last several years, and we think that California's cannabis community deserves the framework that we negotiated. And thank you for your time. I do have two folks. We generally ask less folks to come to town and even less folks to comment. Want you guys to have time for discussion. But Casey O'Neill, Board Vice Chair from Mendocino County, and Diana Gemzon, Board Vice Chair from Nevada County, are both here, and we'll share a couple moments of comments with you if you're willing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Casey O'Neill. I'm a farmer from up in Mendocino County. I very much appreciate the opportunity to address the board today. My farm cultivates cottage-level cannabis. My father is a cottage cultivator. I'm a cottage cultivator. My brother is a specialty cultivator. We also run a vegetable subscription service and 2 farmers markets, and so we grow 35 or 40 some odd different vegetable crops as well. Cannabis is very much a lifeline for us, has been for a long time, and we've been very, very active participants in the policy dialogue, both at the local level, working to pass ordinances, and at the state level through Cal Growers. It's been a journey, and there's been some real high points and some real low points, and I would very much echo Hezekiah's comments. Right now, there is a feeling of devastation in the community, and from the perspective of one who has served as a representative both to and from the community, it's pretty hard to go out and have these conversations right now with farmers who feel betrayed, feel that we're not going to have the opportunity that we had hoped to, and I'm a big believer in the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, and the proposed policy without a cap on cumulative licenses and acreage creates a very real potential for a rapid consolidation in the marketplace that has some very real ramifications for rural communities around the state. Where I'm at, Mendocino County, there are thousands of farmers. By estimates, we have 700, just over 700 applicants right now, and estimates are that that's about 10% of the number of cultivators. So there's right now we're seeing the first mover sort of process, and there's a whole lot of people who are waiting to see what happens. And for a lot of those people who have been waiting to see what happens, they feel like their biases have been confirmed and that they were right not to get into the program. So it makes it pretty difficult for me to try to convince people to move forward when the realities are that big money is trying to run away with the show. And there are huge cultivation operations happening right now in various places in the state. And these are well-capitalized businesses that have the ability to accomplish a multiple licensure process and grow a huge, huge quantity of cannabis. And I think there's a very real need to consider the ramifications of these rural economies, these places that, where we're at, timber, was the lifeline, fishing was the lifeline. These things are gone. And a lot of kids that I grew up with, I'm born and raised in Mendocino County, a lot of kids that I grew up with were timber families or now cannabis families. And if that goes too, we're looking at a fairly bleak situation. So, you know, we're not asking for anything more than what has been part of the process thus far, the 5 years, you know, to get our feet under us, to figure out all of these different regulations. There are 11 agencies at this point that we need to deal with. And, you know, I have a lot of conversations with people, you know, people who are not cannabis businesses who say, well, you know, welcome to the show. You know, you get regulations just like everybody else. But the reality is that we've got more regulations than most anybody else. And it's a lot of hoops to figure out how to jump through, and we need that time. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Casey.
Good morning, members of the board. My name is Diana Gamzon, and I'm the Executive Director of the Nevada County Cannabis Alliance. We represent over 400 members, primarily cannabis farmers and small cannabis businesses that will be seeking a state license. We are in the process of developing our ordinance for local permits, which will likely be available in the springtime, or we've heard reports that possibly summertime, perhaps even into the fall. Our ordinance is not completed yet, so our growers have not even started the transition beyond starting to get their land up to code and started to meet the requirements for at the most basic level for local permits with their land. It is expected that the max cultivation allowance for our county will be 10,000 square feet. It is of vital importance to these independent heritage farmers to have a level playing field in order to successfully transition into the regulated marketplace. That transition time will make a huge difference for farmers in our community. We respectfully request to the board to reinstate the 1 acre cap. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Before I solicit questions from our board members for our panelists, could I get a showing of hands as to how many of you would like to make a public comment? Excellent. Thank you so much. So I will ask our board members for any questions you may have of our panelists. I think, Nancy, did you have one to start with?
Thank you for your presentation. Richard, I had a question about the difference between the local jurisdiction on regulating size and the state.
So the state will issue licenses as long as the applicant is not in violation of any local ordinance or regulation. So that's what the state needs to abide by.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Yes, of course.
So I hear that and I see that written here that CDFA will not issue licenses to applicants in local jurisdictions when cannabis cultivation is banned. However, in a couple of paragraphs below, it states that after 60 days, if there's no acknowledgement by the local jurisdiction, you'll still presume the applicant is in compliance. So can you explain
Correct.
that a bit?
Yeah, so that's the statutory section you're reading. So we will notify the local jurisdictions. That is in the event that the applicant does not provide proof of local compliance. So they don't provide a copy of a permit license or other authorization. We'll notify the local jurisdictions. They have 60 days to respond to us. Then if we don't hear from them, we will issue a license. However, so there's a presumption that they're in compliance, but the local jurisdiction does still have the ability to come back at a later date and notify us if if they aren't in compliance, and then we would take action against the license.
Okay, so potentially you could issue the license, local jurisdiction, let's say they don't comment back, but then they realize, oh, wait a second, that is in violation of our local
Right.
jurisdiction, and then you could withdraw the license at that point?
I'm sorry.
You would withdraw the license at that point?
They would notify us, and we would take an action to revoke the license.
Thank you.
Bryce?
I'm a little bit confused. Maybe Richard or Hezekiah, you could clarify to me that, Richard, you mentioned that there was a a lot size of 100 plants. What does that pertain to? Does that pertain to the size of the operation, or it's just you're tracking plants in 100 plant lots?
Right, so that was with regard to the track and trace provisions. So the canopy sizes for the mature plants, so the immature plants can be kept in a lot of up to 100 plants. And then for track and trace purposes, that lot of up to 100 plants will have one unique identifier that identifies that lot of plants, and then each plant within that lot will have a label that matches a unique identifier.
Growers could have multiple lots of 100 plant units.
Of immature plants, yes.
I'm a little bit, I don't know. I got to tell you, I don't know this regulation as well as I should, Richard and Hezekiah. Is there a limit on size of the registrant or licensee?
On size?
Well, the size and number of, I think maybe Casey spoke to the idea of multiple license.
Yep.
Each licensee, will they have a limit, or is it an unlimited? And is the concern that there'll be these kind of entities that come in and start stacking licenses on top of each other, but the individual license does have a limit?
Yeah, each license from the cottage to the small to the medium are specified in statute and in regulations of the size of that canopy that's allowed for that license type. And then the regulations limit an applicant to one medium license, but there is no limit on the other types of licenses.
Okay.
And so this is where we think we get into a problematic area, and frankly, we think that it would be an absurd outcome if there were to be a 10-acre farm, but they had to bundle 40 type 2 quarter-acre licenses in order to get to 10 acres. If the intent was to allow for a 10-acre farm, we'd just be issuing those licenses. And, keep in mind some of the requirements in order to do that. We're talking about cross-fencing your 10-acre, potentially prime ag soil. The last thing we want is a tic-tac-toe board of quarter-acre squares, right? And so there is no explicit statute limiting the number of type 2 small licenses, but we have reviewed a number of similar implied requirements in statute, and almost invariably the court system does say, when interpreting statute, if the outcome would be an absurd or illogical outcome, it should be assumed that you go the other way. And so the largest single license that will be issued for the first 5 years is 1 acre. From our perspective, while not direct in statute, the implication there is that bundling licenses beyond that would produce that illogical outcome. There has been no shortage of conversation on the topic, and as I think Casey mentioned, there was a general sense that this was the direction we were going. I mentioned some of the other stakeholders that have affirmed that perspective. The folks that we worked with around the Capitol, this was what we were talking about, was a 5-year delay on grows larger than what the cap was. At one point it was a 4-acre cap, at one point it was a 1-acre cap. It has been a meandering road to get there, but there is an inferred limitation here.
Yes, Bryce.
In the FSA rules, I'm a rice farmer, right? There's FSA rules, and corporations are allowed to one membership or entity. A corporation is one entity, but if you're a partnership or a family, and your partnership is 5 family members farming together or multiple partners, those would be as individuals or considered as individuals. Is that just the sort of framework you would be looking for, is to limit corporations to being a single entity? But I imagine in your operation, Casey, if you have 4 or 5 family members, you would be thinking that you could have 4 or 5 licenses, each family member working as an individual farmer?
Yes, with the caveat being Mendocino County caps possible square footage at 10,000 square feet, which is a quarter of an acre. And so Further, I would say that if we were operating all under one business model, that it ought to be a cumulative. So for instance, if I had 5 family members who wanted to do 10,000 square feet, that would put us over an acre. And based on what we had assumed was going to happen with the 1 acre cap, I would say it would be over the top and not acceptable. And so I do think that it is important to see a control aspect over both corporate and individual, because as Hezekiah mentioned in his comments, this is the only marketplace there's a marketplace constraint. And so given the artificial market constraint of federal prohibition and the inability for product to leave the state, there also needs to be some supply side constraints. Otherwise, we are going to end up seeing a real rapid consolidation.
And, you know, I'll mention also one of our other priorities through the course of this year was the establishment of the Cannabis Cooperative Association. You guys are all very familiar, I'm sure, with the nonprofit agricultural associations. And it sort of gets to what you're mentioning. You could have up to 16 small type 2 farmers cooperating in one cannabis cooperative association. Interestingly enough, the concept of a cumulative acreage cap is reiterated in statute in the co-op section, where co-ops are actually limited to a cumulative 4 acres, once again implying that this concept of cumulative acreage cap was intended to be a policy in the framework. So for folks, you know, Casey's family, I'm pretty familiar with what they do. He's on my board, no surprise. They're going to be under this acre cap. They're going to have a few different licenses, cottage grow down the hill, you know, grandma across the way. Well, I won't get too specific, but, you know, they're still going to be under the acre cumulative. But for folks who were in that family, you know, big family, extended family, friends and neighbors, form a co-op. Let's put that cooperative culture into cannabis farming from the outset. And again, with the 4 acre limitation on co-ops, it's just another point where we see this concept of acreage cap repeated.
Richard, I have a question. That is, will CDFA issue a single license for cannabis cultivation to a grower for an operation greater than an acre?
One single license for greater than an acre? No.
Okay.
5 years.
For the...
Yeah, so Prop 64 does authorize you guys to issue them.
In January 1st, 2023, the large type licenses are allowed to be issued, and the large type licenses don't have a limit.
Do you think that our legislature will enact changes in the new year concerning acreage size or not?
I don't know. I don't know. I couldn't speculate on whether they would or not.
I would like to now take public comment, and if you'd be so kind as to introduce yourself, and if you would keep your comments to 2 minutes, we're very happy to listen to your thoughts.
Thank you. Marvin Pineda, Capital Strategies Group, on behalf of the United Cannabis Business Alliance. Couple of comments. I want to put this for the record. We've actually outreached to CDFA several times to meet with them, even this week, and that response was, we can't meet with you because of the emergency regulations. Yet we have, all respect to Hezekiah at the table giving all the input to the board. We did not know about this meeting, just like the rest of the industry didn't know about the meeting. We feel we represent cultivators, distributors, dispensaries, yet nobody has ever, we've outreached to CDFA several times with no response. So we feel that at times all the regulations are being developed without feedback. One quick point just to give you is on this track and trace. We've expressed concerns, and it's not just us. If you have the police chiefs, the district attorneys, the United Food and Commercial Workers, SEIU, local governments, all in opposition to this proposal. Now, we feel, again, CDFA does not give us a voice in the process. We have cultivators from Southern California. We're always eager to show you guys, to show you what's going on in Southern California, yet we never get anywhere. we want to engage with you. And Richard has been great at responding lately. There's a lot at stake here on the whole system. Now, our members have done track and trace for a long time. They pay our taxes. We've been in compliance with every local law. We're all over Northern California and Southern California. And I want to make it clear, we are for protecting the small grower. We want to work with that. We want to protect that because that's our livelihood. That's how people feed their kids and their families. We're in full support of that. That's why we support the acreage cap with Hezekiah. Yet, again, we feel, when has CDFA gone to Southern California and said, indoor cultivators, we want to have a hearing and outreach for that? We would participate. I just want to put that out there. And feel free to answer my questions. I'm here on this. There's a lot of concerns on the track and trace system, and I'm sure people submitted their comments. I don't know if they did or not, but I'm sure that happened, and just want to put that out there. I'm here. I want to cooperate. Yet nobody knew about this meeting. I didn't know about this meeting. We're constantly looking for information on the website, and I just leave it at that. I came here to start the dialogue, and that's what I'm here for.
Appreciate your comments.
I'd like to ask some questions to clarify for everyone who's here in the room. Richard, do you know how many workshops and how many public meetings have been held in the development of regulations and all of the parameters since the beginning of this program 2 years ago, knowing that you have not been on staff that long and Rebecca might be able to document that?
Yes, and I would defer to Rebecca, but I do want to say that through the development of the medicinal regulations as well as the PEIR, there were several multiple meetings throughout the state. And Rebecca may have those numbers if she wants to jump in, but there was extensive outreach throughout the state to gather input. And I will say that for the emergency regulations that we weren't able, none of the licensing agencies were able to hold stakeholder meetings. That's just not part of the process like it would be. Right, the OL process. But it will be when we go out for regular rulemaking at the beginning of the year. But there was extensive outreach.
And I believe you stated that the comment period for the emergency regulations closed yesterday.
Yes, it did.
I also want to make it very clear, this is not an action body. This is information for the state board, which has not heard about the cannabis program in about a year, for them to have information. This is not an action body. This is for information only.
Thank you, Secretary Ross. Last thing, I'm just here to start the conversation and so that everybody knows that we're not asked to be on the agenda, and that's just to put that out there. Thank you very much.
And this is a publicly noticed meeting, and the agenda was posted 10 days ago.
So thank you for your comments, Marvin. Other public comments?
For those individuals wishing to speak, if you want to line up behind the podium, we'll make the process faster.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate that we are having this dialogue. My name is Kalita Todd. I live in Nevada County, and I've been part of that county for over 40 years. I've been part of the organic farm movement for longer than that and began a farm and garden supply in Nevada County many years ago. Now, I wasn't a grower back then, but many growers came to us for supplies. And so I've been aware of this community for all of these years. And what I recognize, I am a grower now. After it became legal to cultivate for medical, I got interested because of my own health issues and friends' issues. And I've been growing for cancer patients for the last 10 years. And it supplements me. It helps me in my retirement at this point. I don't make a lot of money doing it, but it's a supplement that I need. And what I want to just say is that these people in Nevada County, and I know it's true in Mendocino and Humboldt and all of these other rural counties, people have used it as a way to pay their mortgage, to send their children to school. And many of these people are very, very active, wonderful people in our community, involved and caring. We have had a flow of people that were interested only in the, or maybe not only, but definitely strongly in the financial return. And they have not been integrous in the way they've grown with the environment, the way they've handled it, like sending their kids to school in not good ways, and so on and so forth. And it's a blot on our community. And I hope to see these regulations clear that up. But for now, what I hope to see is that this last minute change of the cap be taken off and put back to the 1 acre. Because otherwise, these small homestead growers will not have a chance, and they're going to be leaning on social needs, and they're going to be out of business, and they're going to be looking for how, after this many years, how do I now make a living?
Thank you so much. I
All right,
appreciate
thank
that.
you.
We're going to try just to keep everybody within the same time frame. I appreciate your comments.
Craig, could I just say thank you to Kalita Todd, just a leader in the organic farming movement in California, the Ecological Farming Association. Appreciate Kalita coming today.
Please come forward, and if you can tell us who you are.
My name is Roosevelt Tollison. I am Executive Director of the National Economic Social Development Action Committee. I'm here to thank this board for the excellent work you have been doing in the state, and particularly about the AB 1348 Farmer Equity Act. Yesterday, we submitted a letter of introduction concerning the National Farmer Equity. And I'm just here to, again, to thank you people for the work you're doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments.
Good morning, board, and thank you. My name is Sheldon Norberg. I'm the principal of Essential Medicinals. I've been involved in the cannabis industry for almost 35 years. In 2000, I released my book, Confessions of a Dope Dealer, about my experiences in the industry. I turned that into a solo show. I've been reviewed in New York Times, New York Magazine, across the country. I developed a college-level education program and a nonprofit called Progressive Drug Educators, and I became deeply involved in international and national drug policy. I've studied cannabis policy in the state for over 10 years. And I contacted Representative Bonta's office the day the policy came out and asked his staff the first question: have you considered how much cannabis is used in California and how you will control who grows it and how much anyone is allowed to grow? And Anchi, who you might know, responded, "No, what an amazing question." And again, this becomes the question of the day. We know as cannabis growers that we are a somewhat ostracized minority who have taken a road less traveled, which is now becoming respected as having been an important sub-stream direction as this plant is being recognized for its medicinal and social value. At the same time, you see a tremendously well-advertised rush to the money to take over a market that is deeply entrenched in a subculture and moderated gray culture. What you find in cannabis grows, primarily among small growers and people in rural communities, is that because they've taken this path, they are afflicted by the federal regulations which prevent them from having any access to real capital, to real banking, to real negotiations with anyone other than some very interested capital sources, vulture capitalists who are now trying to rack up as much property and control in the big marijuana game they want to play as they can. If you went back to the state's blue ribbon panel, they put forth the understanding that maintaining a small grower community, that disallowing large-scale agriculture in cannabis, and that allowing us to develop and support our rural communities through our continued use of cannabis was an important thing, and I look to the board to uphold that and reinstate the 1 acre cap. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sheldon.
Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Lewis. I'm on the board of directors of the Inland Cannabis Farmers Association. I think these gentlemen here have represented very well what the problems are if we allow that cap to go away. I would like to say that there are many counties in this state that are taking a wait-and-see attitude toward cannabis and cannabis commercialization, and they haven't even yet passed regulations for their farmers to grow. And if you allow this cap to go away, these people are not going to get a chance, because it may be mid-2018, 2019, before many of these counties finally get on board in this. Meanwhile, those farmers are going to just go away. So I urge you to listen to what we're saying. I urge you to put that cap back on and give these people that have built this industry an opportunity to get involved and play the game. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Hi, thanks, board. My name's Josh Artman, and I'm a farmer in Mendocino County. I've lived there for 10 years with my wife and my 2 children, and I'm a part of this amazing cultivation effort that, our 50-year heritage in California that we need to preserve. I also run a software program called Big Grain Exchange, and I help buyers and sellers meet, and all of our sellers are small farms. So most of the cultivation that's happening in California now is a small farm. So this 1 acre cap is really gonna keep people surviving. I'd love to stay in the small town that I live in, Covelo, with my family. Everybody I know is directly or indirectly affected by cannabis, whether they grow it or whether it's the local food store or the farmer's market. So please keep the 1 acre cap and preserve our heritage. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
Hi, thank you for your work. My name is Shelley Salvatore. I'm from Nevada County. I've known Kalita since I was 19 years old. I got involved in a small farm. My family has 4 farms up in Nevada County. One of my sons has left the area to work in Vermont to grow high CBD hemp because he was a little frustrated with our county and the ordinance problems we've been having for years. I strongly encourage you to listen to us as small farmers to keep that 1 acre cap or put that 1 acre cap back on. You all have the ability and the power to go and say, hey, we need to make some changes, and we're encouraging you to please do so. Otherwise, the small farmers are going to be wiped out. We're already feeling it, and it's pretty scary. We want to keep on going. I also make medicine, so it's very important for me to keep growing my medicine for myself and for others, and just really encourage you to please listen to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shelley.
Hello, my name is Alex Irons, and I am a medical cannabis cultivator in Truckee, California. That is in Nevada County. Last week, my town enacted a temporary moratorium. This means that for up to 45 days to 2 years, we will not be able to apply for any kind of permit, and at that time, it may be outright banned. Me and my fiance have been growing for 10 years. I mean, I'm 26 years old, he's 32. This is our life, and we're thinking that we're gonna have to move. We have no idea what direction we're going in right now, and I really hope that you guys can come together and put this 1 acre cap back in to help people like myself. Thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing that we see that 1 acre cap back.
Thank you for your comments. Any other comments? And summary comments. We'll allow you a few minutes if you'd like to just have any summary comments, and thank you. Don has a question here. Don Cameron.
Hezekiah, I was wondering, how do you see the transition taking place between now and 2023 with your growers? I mean, at some point, the ban, acreage limitation would be lifted. So what's going to happen between now and then?
Sure. I think it's a really good question and one that, could talk for a while about, but I'll keep it as succinct as possible. Record keeping in the past was worse practice. Record keeping is a best practice under regulation. So folks are going to learn how to keep their records. They're going to learn how to do their accounting. Our business members, they're probably not the most business savvy, and it's not an insult to any of them. It's just the way we've operated. Brands. Historically, our product went into a black duffel bag and it left, and we had no idea where it went. We couldn't track the value. We couldn't build consumer relationships. It's only in the past few years that we've even begun to tell our story. 2014, we did a Your Farm, Your Story Identity in the Marketplace workshop, and it felt more like a support group than anything else. Half the room was crying in tears, having never admitted what they did even to each other. So building a brand is going to matter a lot, building those relationships. Organic certification, something we look forward to working with the department and Cal Cannabis on by 2021, the statutory mandate. The tools we need to distinguish our products, to establish our businesses, to get the current existing marketplace that, farmers that don't look like your typical farmers, young folks, folks from all different backgrounds. We're out here growing this stuff now today. We just need a few minutes, few years to get our businesses together, get our brands together, build the appellations program, same as the AVAs for our wine industry. There's just so much excitement and opportunity here. But, we're looking at all of this new development, all of these foundations we've laid, and we're looking at a flood of capital and a flood of folks that are just interested in more, quick. And so, giving the time for those businesses to stabilize, to get those brands, to get those certifications, to get the relationships formalized and transparent is going to make a world of difference. It's going to be a painful transition. We're growing a lot more than we should. And until Washington, D.C. is ready to change, we do have a very real problem. So the problems aren't going to go away, but hopefully they'll be a little bit less severe, and the folks that are in the business now will have an opportunity to get their business shored up.
Karen?
And piggybacking just briefly, we're kind of at a real turning point right now. This has been a process these last 3-4 years of a very marginalized community learning how to participate in the processes, how to engage in local policy, learning about ordinances, learning about initiatives, learning about working with the state legislature. And it's been a tremendously empowering process. And so, like I say, right now we're at a real turning point. Where does this thing continue to be this empowering, amazing thing that invigorates rural communities and brings forward into the light this thing that has been, or does it become a commodified, commercialized, conglomeratized industry? And it's a huge crossroads right now.
Karen?
So I just wanted to acknowledge the work and the collaboration that has happened to get us to this point. Hezekiah, you were very kind in saying it's a pretty heavy lift. It has been. And when you said minutes, 5 years will go by like minutes in government time, so I just want you to know that. But I also wanted to acknowledge it's a fast-growing program, and Richard has been here 2 months now. 2.5. Yeah, he's an old-timer. But it wasn't that long ago that this program had 3 or 4 people, and Rebecca was one of the first ones. Crystal D'Souza's from our legal office, and so she's got everything in the code committed to her memory. And I'm pretty sure I saw Amber Morris in the back of the room. And I just want to thank these people from the beginning to help get us to where we are, and to Richard for your
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you, Richard, Hezekiah, Casey, and Diane, for your work. And thank you, growers and supporters. We very much appreciate your attendance and your public comment. We look forward to the minutes and the years working together. Great. At this point, Secretary, I'd love an update from you, because we missed that at the beginning of our meeting. If you,
did I miss Crystal's introduction?
that's going to come momentarily.
Okay, I'm really sorry, I don't know. So November went by in a flash for me. I was out part of the month. My stepmom died at the beginning of the month, and I just want to share a story about what this woman meant in my life. She came into my dad's life when all of us were grown, And she was the house mom for my baby brother at his fraternity. And my dad did not want him to pledge a fraternity. But the first time he saw her, he knew that she was the one for him. And so she made him very happy for 26 years. So I've been out of the office a bit for that. We have our continuing saga of pest problems. And I think after the great discussion that we enjoyed last night on climate change, it certainly feels like climate is making our pest season last year-round instead of certain times of the year. The shoulders are getting longer. We have every kind of variety of fruit fly I can imagine in almost every part of the state, and it's really straining the staff and the resources that we have. But we continue to plow through that, and it's just something that I cannot believe, the length of time and the seasons and how they're lasting for us. Our ACP situation, we do continue to find HLB, that's the Wong-Long Bing for cannabis growers. You don't have the Asian citrus psyllid, which vectors Wong-Long Bing, which kills your citrus trees. But it's a very serious effort that we're undertaking here because of what the damage is and the loss of citrus to the state of Florida that we've learned from. We continue to find more HLB positive trees. So far, they're only in residential areas. We're still successful in keeping that away from the commercial areas, but the fact we have some cities in Riverside County just moves it that much closer to commercial production. So we continue to work closely with the citrus industry on that. They're going through a really intense strategic planning about the resources and the prioritization of how to do that going forward. We continue with the efforts under the leadership of Dr. Annette Jones for the implementation of the animal antibiotics legislation, which takes effect on January 1st, 2018. This is our effort as a state to address the issues around antimicrobial resistance. It's a broad-based stakeholder effort. We'll have regs, I think they're at OAL now, if I remember correctly. That's yet another program that California is doing that other states have not yet entered into this process. And then we are also in the midst of, I believe, Josh, are we announcing the first soil health awards this week? Maybe. In case you didn't know, this week we kicked off as California Healthy Soils Week, and really trying to engage our public of the importance of healthy soil, building that organic matter for drought resilience and for climate change, that we can sequester carbon and be a part of the solution to climate change. And then lastly, I want to thank Josh. Josh continues to do a great job of putting together our climate smart agriculture delegation trips. He and Ami seem to have the magic formula of the right amount of government visits, academic visits, and tours. And I think the week that we just spent in Chile last week was one of the best. We had a truly engaged group of farmers and academics and stakeholders from California, great government meetings, lots of farm tours, which made everything work better. I have to give thanks to Don Cameron. He really does not farm for a living. He just travels to CDFA meetings. And he has, as the chair of our environmental farming science panel, has been a participant in all 4 of the trips that we have done. They've all led to great collaborations and to webinars and us hosting delegations from other countries to really make sure this exchange of information specific to agriculture and climate change, both understanding its impacts and the impacts to food security and a fast-growing world population, 7 billion today, 9 billion by 2050, as well as the opportunities for us and how we manage our lands and our soils to sequester carbon as part of the solution, is a very inspiring opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and one that if we don't seize and act on fully, we will have shortchanged our future generations. So I'm excited about the work that we can do together and with our other stakeholders here and other countries around the world. And so I just want to thank you all for everything you've done. I'm not going to get weepy-eyed about saying goodbye to Craig as our great chairman. So I'm going to shut up now before I do get weepy.
Okay, so back onto the future generations, because I think that's what our board is very interested in, and certainly our audience members are as well. One of the things that your team visited in Chile was education and what youth are doing. Can maybe Don or Karen, could you give us a little update on? I saw a few of the videos and I was very impressed with that.
While we were in Chile, we visited a program, an agricultural training program that took students from 16 to 19 years, I think it was 14 to 19 years old, that was funded by the farmers and I think some government as well. But it involved them at all levels of ag production, from irrigation efficiency, how to operate systems, to picking the fruit in the field and processing and exporting. So it was really amazing to see 400 students of different ages all working together to learn, to be able to farm, and then move on to jobs in agriculture as they left the system. So just fascinating.
It was neat because about half of these students go on to four-year college and university. But the proceeds from the sales of the crops that they grow on the farm, I think funds scholarships for 30% of their student body, which is it's great. The farmers act as an advisory board to make sure that the training is relevant. And it's one of the few high school programs that has an emphasis on irrigation efficiency. So Andy, since the other dean from UC Davis isn't here, they have a collaboration with UC Davis on irrigation efficiency. And it certainly seems that Cal Poly and Fresno would want to be a piece of that action. So it's another way for us to make some really great connections.
Yes, Bryce.
I just would like to thank Secretary Ross and Josh for the groundwater recharge workshop. It was only a day after our last meeting, but it was amazing. And just thank you for making that a priority and putting together such an amazing group of presenters.
Well, it's this board and the Water Committee that asked us to do this, and you had a lot of input on the conceptual framework for the program, and I can't say enough good about our sister agencies. When I reached out to them, as you directed me to see if they thought this was a good idea, I mean, the responses were immediate and very enthusiastic. And I think that Eric from the State Water Board at the last panel said it best. He views the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act as one of the most important tools we have to be prepared for climate change, and that there's a strong commitment to make sure that we clearly identify barriers and work to streamline the process to make sure that we're doing all that we can to fill those underground reservoirs. Yeah, but you all did a great job. And Ashley was our wrap-up. She had to take, I mean, this was a packed day of outstanding presentations, and we gave her 10 minutes to do a summary at the end of the day.
5.
Oh, who was counting? Don did a presentation, Bryce did a presentation.
I just want to second, I think it was an outstanding day, and I was so encouraged by everybody's energy in the room for the agencies and how willing everybody is to really figure this out so that we really can recharge, when it's possible. And I really want to thank you, Karen, for, leading and engaging the other agencies. And I wonder if you could continue to do that, because it's such an important topic, and I think you are very much viewed as someone who can bring these agencies together. I mentioned it to Grant Davis. He was enthusiastic. But I think you could lead an ongoing task force of interagency on recharge, and I think it would really help ensure that we do address these issues that need to be addressed, so.
And I was going to ask Josh, the follow-up is going to be in the form of the papers, so I was going to ask Josh to suggest.
Well, thank you. First off, thank you everyone for your participation and guidance for the water conference. It was a multi-stakeholder effort, and I also want to thank our other agencies that participated, the Department of Water Resources and the State Water Resources Control Board. Also for the audience as well, all of that information, including videos and all the presentations from those events, are available on CDFA's website, so we have the links and that information is available. We just had a call yesterday with the DWR in terms of working on follow-up and hope to provide updates to both the stakeholders and panelists in early January in terms of next steps of where we should be going. So thank you.
Josh? Mhm.
On a secondary note, I don't know, Madam Secretary, if I may ask, I think one of our public comments talked about the Farmer Equity Act, and I think that would be I know that Taylor, before she had left, had mentioned that in the legislative kind of update, but it'd be good in terms of what your thoughts are moving forward on that, because I know it'd be a great interest to the board.
So I'm thrilled to have you here. I saw a very nice thank you letter on my desk yesterday when I got back last night from meetings across the street. So the first step is that I had to convince, all my friends in finance and other places to have a dedicated position. It was a fascinating conversation I had with the governor as he reviewed this and questioned what the need was and how this could work. And he definitely wants to meet the person we bring in who's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week is thinking about outreach and communication and making sure that all of the farmers, regardless of their size, where they farm, what their ethnic background is, what their crops of choice are, know about the programs that are available through state government as well as USDA. It's another bundler of the financial assistance and many programs from USDA. So we now have a job description. We built that after getting input from Natural Resource Conservation Service. I think they've got great people, and we wanted to have that input, as well as the folks at Ag and Natural Resources at UC Davis. They've got a number of dedicated cooperative extension specialists that are really looking at how to work with all of our farmers in this state. So we have a job description teed up, and we're in the process of getting ready to advertise that so that hopefully we can stand up this program. Instead of waiting for the fiscal year to start in July, we want to have someone on board and get started with the outreach. And we will be meeting. We have a number of requests from stakeholders. I'm assuming you're going to be a part of the group that's asked for that meeting. I think it's later this month or early January. So we just have an outline of how this is going to proceed. It is, at least as we stand up the program, it is something that I'm hoping to house in the executive office until we determine the best place for that, but that illustrates the priority that we're putting on this position and the work that we will be doing. So my Deputy Secretary, Kevin Masahara, who himself was a very small-scale farmer the many years that he farmed, is especially energized about the work that we can do with this.
Martha.
Thank you so very much. That's leadership. 3 years ago, I remember when we started talking about this, both you. Thank you for this, because this is going to make a huge difference in the growth that can happen.
You're going to be my advisor.
Anytime.
Great, good comments all the way around. And I wanted to just take this opportunity to welcome our 3 newest board members. We are so pleased to have all of you, and I know that Rochelle and Andy were introduced yourselves at our last meeting, but Crystal, we didn't have an opportunity to welcome you, and we're so happy to have you here. Would you like to make a few comments about where you've been over the last few decades?
I certainly would. Thank you. I'm really honored to join this board, and particularly because of my own personal passions. And I'll just say a few words about myself and introduce myself to you. I grew up in Florida, a state that most people think of for tourism and beaches, but is agriculture is the second largest industry in Florida as well. And I grew up the daughter of a civil rights activist. And I feel like I was really fed by small grade farmers, because my dad was, when he was not a civil rights activist, was a dentist. And we were frequently fed. His fees were paid by people who would bring chickens, canned tomatoes, who were small farmers themselves, who brought foods and what they had to offer because they couldn't afford to pay his fees with cash. So we really grew up with a very strong connection to people who were on the land. I was also raised by my mom, who is a science teacher, and really taught me at a very early age that we needed to respect our culture, we needed to respect our elders, and we needed to respect science. So those are very core beliefs that came to me very early. I also have to say that professionally, I have been working in the nonprofit and philanthropic fields for my entire career. I come to this work really from the public health perspective. We believe that in public health that the environment has as much effect on people as the individual decisions that they made. We learned early on that we were saying to many people, low-income communities, why don't you make different choices about your health, because then you could have different outcomes. And it took us a long time to realize that people would say, well, when you tell us to eat more fruits and vegetables, tell me where I can buy those fruits and vegetables in the community in which I live. And we really hadn't been considering the environment as much as we should have to understand how that was impacting people's individual decisions. Finally, I would just say I've spent 6 years living outside of the country in Singapore and Southeast Asia, and recognizing that climate change is not something that's going to happen in the future. It's something that's happening right now. All of our communities are being impacted by it, and what I am really excited about is under Secretary Ross, we have a leader who recognizes that agriculture is not just being impacted by climate change, but can actually be a part of the solution. So I really am very much looking forward to being a member of this board, thinking about the environmental issues that we need to consider, thinking about the public health issues, and then also, as you just mentioned, really looking at the equity issues that we also need to bring into this. And I really see this being a way in which California can continue to lead, and I'm very much excited to be a part of this board. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. And I just, while you were speaking and sharing a little bit about your own background, which is so important and what this board does very well, I have deep appreciation to our governor for bringing you all to us, and the excitement, the resources, the vision, the hard work that you all commit to this endeavor. So thank you. And, you know, the diversity of backgrounds. Our audience may not know, but this 15-member board, which was formed in the late 1880s, before the Department of Food and Agriculture. I do. It really is representative of California agriculture. There are 4 of us who represent public entities, and 2 from consumers, 2 from the environmental community. That in itself is quite remarkable. The rest of us are directly related to production agriculture, and by statute, by charter, we have to come from distinct congressional districts, so you get statewide representation. And I think that's somewhat unique in terms of boards around the state. So, and the governor selects us, so we're here as his appointees. So thank you all for joining us. The next part of our meeting is kind of looking forward and looking back. And this is a time, you're welcome to join us and stay with us here. We will look out at 2018 and think about what the issue, and you're also excused to go at any time. And thank you for your presence. We really appreciate it. One of the things that, one of the things I've always enjoyed is having a full audience, and you guys provided it today. Thank you. So this is actually a wonderful kind of thought session or opportunity as board members. And of course, we are being recorded, and this is public. But to think about where we've been and where we want to go in the next 12 months. Josh, did I just get this, or did everybody get a list of where we? Okay, good. So, you know, I think it's helpful to just look at where we've been this year. And as you can see, as is typical of years past, we have been literally all over the map, which is where this board needs to be. As we were mired in 4 or 5 years of drought, those years were largely water-focused. And Karen, I remember our meeting at UC Merced 4 years ago. Profound meeting. 200 farmers showed up. A very difficult time. We had the California Department of Emergency Services with us. And for those of you who are newer to our board, we carry on testimony. We can go anywhere in the state. We are not obliged. I hate to say this, Karen, but we're not obliged to the department, and we're not. We are here to advise our Secretary of Agriculture and our governor on the issues that pertain to this industry. So as you look over from our Farm Bill listening session in February, safe drinking water, this board takes that issue incredibly with a great deal of thought. Farm labor has always been part of our mission. And as you look over this list here, it also reflects Ag Vision and what we've done this past year and this current year to move that forward. Agricultural land conservation, so important if we want to have a future of farming in California. DACA was very insightful. That meeting for me might have been one of the most profound of this year. Very insightful. The water fix is our future, I believe, and something that I think this board will be very much looking at in the future of next year. And I think our discussion last night on climate change was sobering, very sobering. And I think our governor's role globally as a leader in finding solutions to climate change is so profound, and I think we all want to actively support that. So I'll just open it up to you all as to where you want to take the dialogue next year. I see here some of our actions. This board is an action-oriented board. We, as I said, advise the governor and the secretary. We can advise the legislature. So, Josh?
Thank you. First off, Craig, I want to thank you again for your leadership and your guidance. I have learned so much, and I think this board has learned so much from your leadership and your tenure here, so we greatly appreciate that. And I think what would be very helpful for all of us, and I think it's a great opportunity for us, is to kind of treat this as your exit interview. To kind of understand from your participation on this board for, again, almost 16, 17 years, kind of what your thoughts are in terms of how best this board can serve the farmers and ranchers and the agricultural stakeholders of our community.
Josh, that is a wonderful, thank you for that. That's a wonderful stepping stone. I'm over my tenure on the board, I have been impressed and sometimes frustrated that our colleagues don't know about this board. And that's, you know, our farm colleagues. So if we go to the farm communities around the state, Kalinga, or to Firebaugh, or up north, our farmers and people invested in this industry may not know of the incredible work that we do here. So I encourage us, I will be departing the board, but I will be a farmer for the rest of my life. And so I will be here in one way or another. And I really encourage this board to continue the dynamic search, the complex search, to build relationships and build our audience. I don't feel very successful in that. It's a difficult role to get people here. These topics that you look at, they're cutting edge, not just in California, the fourth largest agricultural economy in the world. They're cutting edge across the nation and the globe. We should have legislators here. We should have concerned peoples and nonprofits, and I don't know quite how to do that. But that's one of my takeaways, Josh. And just have, on either side of me here, we have the best. I mean, we have the best secretary in the world right here, and we have the best ED in the world right here. We couldn't do this without you both, and still we can do more. So how you do that, I'm not quite sure. We have a full board, which we haven't had for a time. You know that wonderful governor of ours. You saw him last night. He touches everything. I mean, the things, can you imagine how many boards, how many cabinet roles, how many deputies he needs to appoint? So we didn't have the three of you for almost 2 years. Rodney's seat was open for, yeah. So we have a full board, and so now we need to act on that. Climate change, what we can do as a board, I think is quite significant. The other thing, Josh, correct me, both of you, we can't lobby as a board, can we? And we can write resolutions, we
are an advisory body to the Secretary and Governor.
So we can't go across the street.
You can as individuals.
That's okay. That was my point. You need to put this on. I can go across the street to meet with the governor. I don't think as the president of the board I can go to.
Individual representatives, individual citizens, you are more than welcome to lobby. But as a member of the board, you're in an advisory capacity, and nothing can be done without board approval or action.
Right. So my comment was specifically related to visiting with Governor Brown. Right?
I believe I can,
You can do
and
that
and I do,
anytime.
and have, yeah. But my point simply is what you just said. As individuals, as informed policymakers, visionary activists, we can do whatever the hell we want to do across that street. And I encourage you to do that. Don't, and take these opportunities, these meetings. We typically wrap up at 3. Go across. Meet your legislators, your senators. Invite them to your job sites, to your educational centers, to your mayorship, to your work in nonprofits, to your work in the winery, and get these people out. I feel so fortunate because our farm is 35 minutes away. I would love to be, I think that's my best role, is to be there as an educator. Because our farm is, we have the ability to, we're a one-stop shop. We can talk about water quality, land conservation, education of youth, beginning farmer, training programs, air, equipment, whatever.
You know, Craig, it's interesting that you say that, because I think when you say the best role is there as an educator, I think, you know, for this year, and I think that both Don Bransford spoke about it and also Nancy spoke about it, when we had the opportunity in August, I believe, to go to it be in Kalinga, tour a variety of different farms to talk about some of the healthy soils initiatives that were going on and practices, was the best educational venue that we had. And in terms of the stakeholders that were involved and participated, that not only in the public but also through other agencies, was very proactive in terms of what this board can do in terms of educating the issue.
Good point. And yes, Nancy.
So while we've talked about the importance of healthy soils, what is appropriate for us to get healthy soils funding in the 2018 revise and not be dependent on what may or may not happen on the bond issue?
Aaron?
So there was $1.5 billion one-time funding made available in September as a result of being able to negotiate the extension of the cap-and-trade program. The extension of the program was a critical missing step of bringing some certainty to the auction process. And the last 2 auctions have been extremely successful, much larger than our conservative projections were, because we've brought that stability and that certainty of the program being in place for people to be active participants in the auction. But despite the generation of additional revenues, we actually will have less funding available for the next fiscal year's spending plan, because we ran down the reserve program, and it's incumbent upon us, because of the length of some of these programs, that we rebuild that reserve. So we're looking at, instead of $1.5 billion, something around $1.2 billion, I'm just estimating that. So looking at what was included in the expenditure plan for the 16-17 year, and then building the 2018 spending plan, is going to start with less money. So agriculturalists are meeting, discussing the allocation that was made available and what the needs are for that. Obviously, the legislators themselves will be weighing in on whether those were the right priorities. Obviously, everyone was excited by the $1.5 billion spending plan this year. For the first time, put a heavy emphasis on transportation, because mobile sources are a huge source. And in attacking that, we're not only addressing climate change issues, we're addressing very important public health issues and air quality issues. And so that will probably continue to be a priority, Nancy. We also have what passed concurrent with the extension of the cap-and-trade program was AB 617, which was all around criteria air pollutants and the investments that will be made. Again, it's a public health and environmental issue. air quality issue in addition to a climate issue. So those will continue to drive some of the priorities for the spending. So I think at this point, it's staying in touch with the agricultural advocate community as well as individual lawmakers.
I noticed in the 2018 draft meeting dates, you're showing two-day meetings, and I just want to comment on that. That was originally thought of by Miles Ryder, and it's a great opportunity because those can be off-site, as the one that you mentioned, Josh, and I think they're fantastic opportunities for learning and outreach. And I really encourage you to use those. As I recall, this might be something that you want to do again. About 4 years ago, it might have even been 5, I had a little survey for you to ask you about how we're doing. You all serve on boards. You're all involved in nonprofits or business boards. And this is a board. How are we doing? What do you like? What doesn't work? Before my tenure, I'll tell you one thing I didn't like. We didn't have lunch. Yeah, we didn't have lunch here. Okay, so Josh has taken over lunch. He makes lunch for us. No, but that's a simple one. But I remember it was a long survey, and Miles came back and he said, you know what? Monthly meetings don't work for me. And I listened to him. And I didn't think we could really go to every other month, 2-day meetings. So we have a mini compromise. Right? Go ahead.
Well, I think the benefit and the wisdom in terms of having monthly meetings of the board, it allows us to address issues that become relevant during the timeline. I mean, it allows us that, and you've allowed us, and previous presidents have allowed us that flexibility to kind of address those kind of key issues that arise during certain situations, whether it be wildfire assistance, for instance, to be able to have that briefing to discuss what programs are available less than 10 days after those fires concluded and what resources are out there to meet deadlines, I think is critical. And so having that flexibility is key. By statute, the board does need to meet monthly. And so we worked the schedule to be able to reflect that and to be able to maximize those 2-day meetings as well.
Ben?
So I do like the idea of the 2-day meetings. It gives an opportunity for all of us as board members to interact with each other a little bit, which, coming in and going out of meetings really doesn't give us the opportunity to kind of know our other board members. But one of the things that I would say that maybe for me is a little more critical is I think we try to get too many speakers, and I think we've brought it up before. Yeah. Too many speakers, too long of a day on speakers, and not really allowing the board to have time at the end of the meetings to really dwell down on those particular items that were brought up and thoroughly vest our comments towards those. So that's the only thing that I can really say. Craig, I think you've done a phenomenal job as president and supporting Karen, and who doesn't like Karen? Karen's an energy budget a bug, but I mean, listening to Annie last night, I'm going, you got some stiff competition there, Karen.
I would agree with that. That's great. I agree with that. Other thoughts?
Do you want us to kind of maybe talk about some of these, or are we going to talk more of it over lunch as far as some of the topics?
Now's the time. Yeah, I think we've got plenty of time now.
I guess while I'm there, I've got two kind of categories and maybe a third one. Mine is kind of looking at the safe drinking water issue again. Mm-hmm. I also want to look at the groundwater recharge, and we've got that kind of ball started. I just don't want to drop it and go from there. And then, the governor set up Sigma, and I just want to see where that whole process is going, and maybe that's a more than maybe a full day right there. Yeah, that's probably a 2-day. And so then my other one, which is kind of goes along, and I'm going to say it's probably on climate warming, but I'm concerned about where our materials are that we're going to build the carbon in the soil. So I know there's a facility down in my neck of the woods in Paris that has a digester that's doing all the food waste. They're taking green waste in and they're running it through an anaerobic digester. They're collecting the methane and putting that back into Southern California gas lines, as well as running all their trucks. But there's also the issue of all of the waste that comes out of LA County that's going clear over into Nevada. It's going clear up into Barstow. All of our sewer sludge that leaves our sewage treatment plant hits the freeways and is moved all over again. And then at some point, this material is all composted and it has to be loaded on trucks again and bring it all the way back. So to me, there's a disconnect. My feelings is if you're a generator, you need to generate and solve your problems within your city or within your county rather than putting all these trucks on the roads. Right now, I'm spreading probably almost 10 loads a day. And they're coming and going from Barstow back to Temecula, which is good, I don't know, almost 200 miles.
Ben, what is that product?
It's a combination of sewer sludge and green waste that's been completely composted, so it's a Class A material. And it's been screened, it's ground, it's very clean. The cost of the material coming back to me is zero. I am paying nothing for it.
Really?
Because what happens is when they charge me for it, I can't afford to put it on the fields and spread it because the cost of spreading material is cheaper for me to go buy nitrogen and put it on my field than it is for me to spread this mulch. But I want to improve the soil, so I put in a new 50-acre block. I put 2 semi-truckloads, so 50 tons of material on 50 acres, so it's over 100 truckloads. Ripped it in the ground, and right now, 2 years later, I'm going back through and putting another 2 truckloads and doing it as a top dressing on the vineyard. So, I mean, between those 2 materials, and I mean, my organic matter in that soil was 0. And I'm trying to get it up to 2.5%, 3%.
Great, good work.
The topic of compost tying into healthy soils is very, very timely because of the regulatory process at Cal Recycle as part of our diversion from landfills and trying to compost as much as possible, but also the conversation that we're having at the State Water Resources Control Board, because was it 5 or 6 years ago when they did their first regs on composting, there wasn't as much interest from the farm community for on-farm composting. So if you want to do on-farm composting, you're treated like a commercial entity. And so we're working hard with the State Water Board to remove barriers to more on-farm composting that's for your own use. And so there's some issues around that this would be a very timely topic for probably the first quarter of 2018. But some of this we'll see more clearly what the future is.
Bryce?
Craig, thank you for continuing to bring focus to our board and what we're going to do. We had a revisit to vision last year. I think it would be really important for us to get the documents out. We have, task force? Is that we call them task force? 4 areas, is it? Or was it 6 areas? I should know that by heart. I think 4. And we had some goals that we set in those 4 areas. I think we've all started those, but I would love to get that document sent by electronic mail back to me to start focusing on and revisiting those goals to accomplish what we said we'd like to accomplish. In addition to those, I was interested in regenerative agriculture. I know that has a bit of a controversy in the organic community as far as the term regenerative. I don't think there's anyone who's concerned or worried about regenerative agriculture, but just the idea of a new term in the organic community. I would love to have a focus on regenerative and how we could embrace that term and what it means, and it's referenced as one of the 100 in the drawdown book. The other area I would like to focus or consider focusing on is the interface between farms and waterfowl and fish, and the importance, especially, I think the waterfowl has been identified for many, many years, but fish to me has a whole new focus as we continue to work with the State Water Resource Control Board, and I think every farm, no matter where you are, can have an impact on improving fish. The further away from the rivers and streams, I think maybe the less connection, but I think it all starts in our watersheds, right? And I think working in the watersheds, even though sometimes you think, well, how many of the migrating fish come, but they come up there. And I would love to have maybe cow trout and Audubon and DU. I don't know how long it's been since we've had those groups come and present how farms and the wildlife interface, challenging sometimes with the food safety and those interactions, but I would love to have some of that focus.
I think that's a really good one, and it's very focused, but it leaves out a lot of people who don't have the water to be able to do that. So I think it needs to be a bit broader on other species that people have been able to do. And someone who's missing today, because he's working on a paper, are the opportunities for monarch butterfly. It's like we could make that between honeybees and monarch butterflies. Farmers could be real champions, and there's some pilot projects this year. And I think Eric would be a great contributor to thinking about how we're coexisting with the species, and it can be a very positive thing. But I agree with you. Doing for the salmon what rice growers have done for the ducks is pretty exciting.
Be doing my job if I wasn't going to say, last year, we met our goal of reaching 200 million pounds of food being donated by farms to family food, or the food banks for families. I'm hopeful at the end of this month we will have exceeded that 200 million. I haven't received an update most recently, but those kind of goals are so valuable in setting them and then attaining them and then setting new ones.
And thank you, Bryce, for leading that, both on this board and as an industry person and as a business owner in your family. Thank you for doing that.
Well, and then just to just really thank Joy for that focus when we were in the emergency and the recovery from emergency. Your focus on food banks was really very, very important.
Thank you. It was a small drop in the bucket, but my family and I were just so thrilled to do what we can, and the response was amazing, absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Martha and then Nancy.
Well, about topics, I have been involved in the last 6 months to a year on urban farming. There's a growth, amazing growth. We was a little bit, and now it's really brewing. And I've been invited to several urban farms, and talk about fish. There's not even a policy of fish nutrients for the urban farms and all that. So I think that we should keep that in mind, because that brings a lot of the youth, the new generation. Maybe we move them into the rural areas if they like it a lot. That's one. I think visiting technology again. We went to Silicon Valley, and there's a boom happening in Silicon Valley that I think that they need to hear a little bit more from farmers versus they're going like to Mars and we're like here. Can you just solve the problems here? I think that they need to hear a little bit more from us in some shape or form. That trip was amazing, an eye-opener, and I think revisiting that would be great. And now that there are retailers and everybody has a spot in Silicon Valley. And now that you're going to be in Stanford, maybe we should go and visit you there. Maybe we can set up a Stanford thing there. No, seriously, because Stanford is heavily on that. And last but not least, this would be my third year asking finances, banking industry, with a new tax reform happening. Is going to come down on several small farms, medium farms. I know they talk about for corporations it's going to be a tax, but It's $1 million and above and all that, so we have to be careful. So banking industry should be brought to the table here to discuss what are they doing in the industry and how they're going to work with farmers, organizations, etc. That'll be like my third year. Please, please,
Good.
please.
Joy, I didn't mean to cut you off, and then Nancy.
Okay, well, it's really reassuring to hear so many things on my list that have already been mentioned. So it's very great to be participating in a body that is looking holistically at this issue. I would just add that Rodale Institute has done a 30-year study, and when we're talking about soil health, it would be really great if we could have some representation to be more familiar with that. And then I would say probably my one of my highest priorities at this juncture is a more aggressive primary education for kids. So we have a program where we take third graders and put them on a farm, and we see them from the third grade up through high school making different choices. So I don't know what the mechanism might be. I know that there are industry programs where we try to do more training for kids. Craig, you've of course been a leader in youth education and agriculture, but I wonder if there's a more formal relationship we could have to make sure that we are aggressively pursuing ag education at the primary school level.
Good point.
Would that be then something that we could have ag in the classroom come? Is that, or maybe there's multiple programs like that?
Joy?
Well, Craig, first of all, let me add my voice to the chorus of praise. Thank you so much. It is such a privilege to get to know you. And I think everybody agrees that you're stuck. You're not just going to Palo Alto does not mean you've gotten rid of us. We're going there. Yes. You mentioned the water fix, and I think that that is obviously going to be a huge topic because something has to be done. We have no choice. And perhaps it would be great if we could use one of our two-day meetings and go to the Delta.
Yeah. Could I come?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love that. Thank you. And Crystal?
Well, I just want to build on all of these great comments, and as a newbie, I'm just going to throw out a few ideas, but I really, on what Bryce and Martha were saying, I want to build on this idea around, I've been doing quite a bit of work on regenerative economics. So looking at, which is really kind of combining some of the issues of regenerative agriculture and the basic economics of what goes along with that, looking at local issues around how you really build local economies, how we really have some answers for and some responses to poor rural areas as well as poor areas within urban areas that are really beginning to think about how do you both encourage and document the cycling of dollars within the local community before they leave the community. And I think we have a lot of really interesting things to think about that. Very much interested in urban farming and doing much more work on soils, because I think that really is where we end up looking at real significant carbon sequestration. And then I also think that there's just some really interesting conversations to be had around agriculture and culture. There's some very interesting work that's happened. I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard of a guy named Michael Twitty. I come from the South, so I'm not a Californian, and I'm sorry for that in terms of my historical, what I bring to this body, but he's done some really interesting work of, he is a historian and a chef who has been moving around the South, and he's doing work and bringing together folks who are from, sort of whites and blacks to talk about the history of Southern food and soul food. He says he calls it his Southern Discomfort Tour. But it is really about bringing people together for meals to talk about the history of many different folks who are coming together, who are at odds in the South, but really thinking about food as a way of bringing people together to have conversation about culture. And I think we can do some very similar things here in California, bringing together many of the people who are on the side of owners as well as workers. And I think we can talk about what are, one of the things that we need to do around climate change is not talk about climate change as something that's different and far away, but what are the things right here, right now that are worth saving? And I think many of those things are on our tables. So I just would encourage us to think about that as well. Thanks.
Very, very nicely put. And Don, and then Ashley, and Martha. Don?
Thanks, Craig. I really appreciate your leadership over the years. When I first met you down at our farm, when Lisa Jackson, head of EPA, came to visit, and you showed up, and we've had a friendship ever since, and I have a lot of respect for you and what you've done. It's been great. We've already talked about Sigma, but I think that we need to really revisit it as we get into the year, because the effects of Sigma on certain areas throughout the state are going to be dramatic. And I think we need to follow that and as it progresses, because it's going to be very important for the ag community throughout California. And I also think that we need to take a look on the partnerships between the farmers and NGOs. We're seeing the environmental groups and the farmers actually getting together and working toward the same goals, which is really a nice change, rather than spending all our time and money fighting each other. So I think there's a place for that in a meeting. Food safety, FSMA, I think we need to take another look at that, see where we are with implementation and any issues. We did talk earlier about NAFTA and trade, and with what's going on in Washington, this is a huge issue for California that's being bargaining chip currently that could cause major disruption throughout the state, since so much of our agriculture is exported. So maybe I'll just leave it at that. Other than the ag school in Chile was really impressive, and it just seems that I know actually in Clovis they have a high school that engages in agriculture, but it's odd that they're doing it there and we can't do that here. I know the ag colleges train and develop leaders for agriculture, but not everybody's going to be going in at that level. And I think there's a lot of young people that you could get excited about moving into agriculture that haven't looked at that as a possible career. So, thank you.
On that note, there are a number through the Linked Learning grant program, which the employer community generally is much more engaged in this type of vocational education. The healthcare community in Northern California in particular has a crisis, and so they're very engaged. And it's that employer connection of helping to raise this as a set of issues. I was on a panel with the speaker's chief of staff a couple of months ago, and she heard from all of us from the business community talking about vocational education. It was an eye-opener for her. I bring that up because that grant program will run out of funding, and it's one that I think is critical for continuing. It's just one example. So one of the first-year grants went to the Wonderful Academy, which is in West Hills. So it's that 4 years for those students to have, but it's not exclusively ag. It's ag as part of their ongoing curriculum, but it's to expose them to that. And I also want to say that at the school in Chile, they said that they had started to see enrollment decline a couple of years ago until they brought in the technology piece of ag, and now it's just going right up. So that's what we need to. You can't aspire to something that you don't know is letting you do what you love to do best.
A point on that, or Ashley, point on that? Yes, please.
Well, that just ties in our need to keep our eye on the expansion of broadband into the rural areas.
Just a quick comment on that. In winters, California, 35 miles from here, or 35 minutes from here, I pay $226 a month for broadband.
And is it high speed enough to actually?
It's high-speed-ish. Yeah. In a second, after some comments, I want to talk about Vietnam in a trip because of high-speed internet and Wi-Fi everywhere. But Ashley.
I want to echo, well, all the topics sound great. You're going to have a challenge putting these into 12. But I do want to underscore Sigma. So the next couple years are really critical. The groundwater sustainability plans are due January of 2020. And Sigma hinges on excellent groundwater sustainability plans. That it's really like the key. So I think something early on to understand, do the GSAs have what they need to be able to produce a strong plan? And if not, how do we get that to them? I think that would be a timely and important meeting. And then I also wanted to mention, and this might be something we could integrate with Recharge, but the Central Valley Flood Management Board passed a updated flood management plan this year, which for the first time has a conservation strategy in it that calls for green infrastructure as well as the traditional modes of strengthening levees. And how that gets implemented over time, I think is important, and there's opportunities to integrate it with Sigma, potentially. How that happens, the DWR has a lot of interest in this. This is their FloodMAR, but I think we could actually focus on actually that flood management plan itself and how that implementation is going to go now. Because I'm not actually sure how many folks in the agricultural community are actually aware of that plan, and I think everybody probably should be, so.
Good points, Ashley. Martha.
You mentioned a couple recommendations to the board. I think that the Water Committee has done an amazing job because there's a specific committee for that. So maybe an education committee, whether it's the education to farmers or education to kids or any which way, could be like an ad hoc committee or committee within the board. Because we believe, I mean, talking with Miles last night, his commitment is to hire 2,000 kids to work in his farms, born in USA, from here, in here. And he said the hardest part he's having is because they don't see this as a fun place. So we came up with a couple ideas last night, but the reality is that they don't want to come and work, though it's a wonderful industry, we think so. So I think that maybe that will entice him also to stay on that committee, because that's it. That he said in the next 3 years, that's what he's going to be working. Kids from the colleges coming to the farms to work at the farms and creating any which ideas to that. That would be an interesting concept because he has the infrastructure and we can work around it with him and come up with ideas that we can then copycat or simulate across the state.
Can I just piggyback on that? Oh.
Can I comment on that? Because I was sitting next to Martha and while Miles and I were having that conversation. And part of the problem is that the employer and being an employer, it's hard to hire anybody that's not 18. So that maybe is something that we need to look at, making that a little bit easier and maybe a little more comfortable for all of us to be able to do.
You had a comment too. Good point there.
Yeah, just to piggyback on both of those, love the idea of education. Please let me volunteer if we decide to create a committee on that. But I was just going to throw in, again, from the perspective that I'm bringing to this board, is the farm to school, farm to preschool kind of aspect of it, and maybe there's a way to incorporate it. It's not as sexy and it's not as urgent as some of these other issues, but I think when you're looking at long-term strategies and talking about the workforce development part, just the education piece to it. I also wear a hat at a nonprofit organization that does workforce development. I'm wondering if there's something we can do at the state level to explore that piece of it, because it is definitely untapped, and I don't think there's just any knowledge that that can be an area of workforce development.
Well, I think there's definitely, kind of following up on what Rochelle had mentioned, is that I think there's definitely opportunity for this board as an advisory body to the department to really be able to kind of focus on the Office of Farm to Fork and some of the work that they're doing in terms of helping to direct, because that's the nexus in terms of the education, the farm to school, and how we can link that and nutrition.
Andy?
Well, I feel cheated a little bit, Craig. Yeah, everything's off my list. Not only that, but I met Craig at your farm probably 2 years ago.
Yeah,
I remember it was a pretty cool morning.
It was fun.
We stopped by and it was great.
Yeah.
And I feel a little bit cheated because this is only my second meeting in a short period of time, and now you're not going to be joining us, down the road. So I feel like, y'all have had a great opportunity that we missed out on, some of us newbies. I appreciate your leadership in just the last two meetings, and last night was awesome. I just want to say that again. That was, I even called my wife last night and told her about that.
Yeah.
And my wife knows Karen, and I said, Ann and Karen are kind of two peas out of the same pod. And interesting, across the table, and how, energized. I'm glad I was sitting a couple of people away, because I would have been dancing. Anyway, I just wanted to make a couple of comments. It sounds like a lot of the same challenges that we're all bringing up. The water fix stigma, I think, is just a huge opportunity. It's a crisis area that's waiting to happen if we're not careful. The FSMA, food safety, and the challenges that brings to producers in all levels. And then the composting and soil health. And in our college, we've just invested, I think I've hired 4 new soil scientists. We were down to 1, and when I went out and met with industry, we got hammered, and I've got 6 new people. And I'm telling you, 3 of the best people best hires I think I've ever made.
And now you need the students.
And the students are there. It's interesting. Students don't apply to soil science.
Right.
But once they get in and they take the class, because of, in our college and in biology, a lot of the students have to take soil science as a course. And once they take it, they fall in love with it. And so they transfer into that major. But it's huge, the number of job opportunities for each of those students that get out. So it's an area of growth for us, and we see that it's been diminished in a lot of universities because of budgets and a number of things. I wanted to make a comment on urban backgrounds, and that people lose sight of the fact that a little over 82% of all people in the U.S. are from an urban background. And I have conversations fairly often with faculty and with other universities, recently with a group of deans last summer, and I remember the dean at the Texas A&M saying, these kids just don't have the background anymore. And I just kind of reminded, and we're kind of in the same boat, but I just reminded him, we're in the learning business, right? That's what we are doing. And sometimes you have to teach them what a pitchfork is, but the technology and putting in the new tools and all of the the data and the digital stuff, that really gets young people excited. But whether it's our university or Fresno State or Chico or over here at UC Davis, 75% of our students coming into the ag sector are from the city. I recently had a conversation with Bakersfield. They said, well, these kids are from Bakersfield. Good kids, Jeff Huckabee over there. And I said, Jeff, yeah, they grew up, they went to school, they weren't out in your farm working. They've never driven a tractor. They haven't even probably climbed on a tractor before. So this is a challenge that we have. That brings us to Wonderful. The Wonderful company has 3 charter high schools. It'd be kind of interesting to have a conversation. Grimway has 2 charter, I want to say K through 8. Well, Wonderful has farm worker communities. Exactly, farm worker communities, and my hat is off to those organizations. And for the last 3 years, Wonderful has a partnership with Cal Poly where they bring those first-generation students so that they understand what a university is, because those young people don't have a clue. I'm a first generation. I grew up in a family of 9 kids on a farming operation in the state of Washington. It was feast or famine, and I recall mostly famine when I was growing up. But, had I not come down to Cal Poly and visited a friend when I was a senior in high school, I would have never done what done what I did. And so I think it's just opening the door, turning the light on, and showing there's so many opportunities. So that's something that I think somehow, if this board could be involved in something like that, it'd be great. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of effort.
Thank you, Andy. I want to second your thought about soil science. In the summer of 1974, I took an all-summer course. I think it was 8 units on soil science, and we traveled around the state of California. It was the best class because it was hands-on. It combined Davis students with Berkeley students. We did our own cooking, it's the way to go. Bryce.
Well, I was the same thought there, Craig. I was going to recommend 3 speakers for next year. I understand Cal Poly has 3 new soil scientists on faculty. Some of our staff at our farm have gone out to the Rodale and have taken some classes out there. They've come back and have a new emphasis on the soil and capturing information or data on the soil, and they're using these East Coast labs. And I would say, well, why are you using those East Coast labs? We have plenty of labs out here, and these are the lab analysis I recognize and understand. Why aren't you using them? And they're looking at things in soil in a lab analysis I have never looked at and really don't know how to feel comfortable with those. I'd love to, guess I have to go out to Rodale and take those classes out there, but I imagine your faculty could speak to the new ways in looking at soil and evaluating soil. Of course, we all want to look at organic matter and the value of building soil through crop rotation, but it'd be I think very interesting to hear what the new and latest is on that.
I have to say, we had a group touring here earlier in the week, and one of our plant pathologists in our strawberry center was talking about some of the students that are undergrads and master students working on research project, and the roots and the different bacterial populations and doing all the DNA work on there. And I mean, it was like way over our heads. And that's what they're doing. That's the kind of things that they're doing out there on the East Coast. And we're starting to. There's starting to be a group of people in California here that are starting to look at those things a little tighter.
So one thing we haven't talked about, very important, Farm Bill. This is the year. So you may want to have it front and center. Where are we, Karen, in terms of a California Farm Bill? I know it's something this board's talked about. Where?
Well, it's been discussed. I'm trying to think, the last audience where I spoke about this, it seemed most interested in carrying this forward was when I was down in the Bay Area. And the organization is Urban Tilth. It has a very dynamic executive director, Doria Robinson, in Richmond. And Richmond is an area that we might want to visit for urban ag. She's pretty phenomenal. It could be a piece of, they're trying to put together a grant for transformational climate community. And she really was looking for how to build partnerships with traditional farmers in the valley and other places, and she really lit up about that, but I have not seen a lot of energy around creating a California Farm Bill. It's been about 10 years the last time that people talked about that.
Other thoughts? Yeah, Bryce.
Well, I was just wanting to also piggyback on Ashley Boren's thoughts on Sigma and Sigma implementation, and whether or not we have the resources necessary for the GSAs to do the implementation necessary to make it successful. I guess I've always been somewhat politically active, but son of a gun, it does take, I think, us to be active and involved in these issues to make sure we have those resources. I sure appreciate Governor Brown's leadership with Senator Pro Tem Kevin Dale Leon in SB 5 and the resources that it brings toward that. I look forward to that in June. I also look forward to potentially being able to support a measure that will bring significant resources to Sigma implementation $675 million in Jerry Merrill's bond to assure that there are funds available for SIGMA implementation, as well as $100 million in supporting the flood measures that are in the flood agencies group. And I never thought I'd be on the cutting edge or the forefront of trying to support a water bond on a statewide basis, and it's way beyond my comprehension and what Jerry Merrill's put together as far as $8.8 billion for that sort of effort. But I would encourage you, if you're interested in that, I'd love to speak with any of you in relationship to that.
Thanks for your work on that. Ben and Don?
So on your comments on SIGMA, I'm really concerned over what the authority is going to have within those groups, whether or not they can actually mandate recharging, recharge the basin and charging fees or whatnot to recharge those. I happen to be in an adjudicated basin, so our district handles all of the imported water, and we put it out to all of our customers. But I just don't see how SIGMA's going to work unless there's a mechanism in there to recharge those basins, and somebody's going to have to pay for it. And most of these don't have water meters on them. I just see it's going to be a disaster, and maybe it'd be a good conversation to have with Dan Dooley and see what he thinks of the legal side may be coming as these SIGMAs begin to get enacted.
Ben, when you're in an adjudicated basin, you don't have to have meters on your groundwater to make sure that those who have the rights use them appropriately.
The way our district was formed is all of our customers have the right to all the groundwater, even though you're over the groundwater basin. So you as a property owner have given up your rights to the groundwater, and all of those rights have been delivered to the district. And so the district does all the pumping. They take all of those costs of wells, developing wells and whatnot, all of our capital improvement projects all get spread over the cost of water. So everybody pays equally under 218. So when we do a notice, everybody's paying the same. It makes it a whole lot simpler, but I just don't see how that same type of a mechanism is going to work under SIGMA.
So what time do we need to be over there? At 11:30?
No, we can be there whenever we want. I just wanted to share something off the top. Oh, excuse me, Don, you were on deck.
Thank you. One thing we haven't spoken about is gene editing.
Yeah.
In plants.
Just plant breeding in general.
And plant breed, right, and plant breeding in general.
Good point.
In regard to climate change, we were in Chile, and the cherry breeder was telling us it took 15 years to get a new variety out, and it took even longer to get new rootstocks put together that were satisfactory. And if we're looking at rapid changes in our environment, we're going to need crops that will need to be adapted faster than a 10 to 15 year program to deal with the new climate we're faced with right now. So I'd love to hear someone come in and give us an update on where they are and what they're doing for the future.
Excellent point. Joy?
Well, if we're going to talk about that, then we need to also hear about the opposition to GMO, just so we can get our heads around that as well.
Yeah, gene editing, goes either way. Some consider it a GMO, others don't, because it's within the same. They're not bringing in new genes, just turning them on and off. Yeah.
Those need to be discussed, absolutely, and I think good point there. I was just going to take us abroad for a second because of the Chilean trip and the trip that Secretary and we took to Israel last summer, a year ago summer, looking at water and climate issues. This board is very active in doing those sorts of international communications and learning opportunities, and I would really encourage that. I know that it's not a board policy, but many of the members of the board are frequently incorporated and invited, correct, Josh?
Yes, and I think what's interesting about that, and I mean, we've completed 4 trips so far, focusing on climate-smart agriculture, on specialty crops. But I think what's really, the strong takeaway, and I think the individuals that we involve in these trips start to see that as well, is that, California's agricultural industry is the best in the world. And to be able to see and have policymakers be able to see what's happening on the ground in foreign markets and how that is so much different than what we have and the challenges that we have versus the production challenges that they have is very eye-opening. And I mean, and that comes back to going back to our visits that we're able to do here in the state, bringing policymakers to the farms to kind of see what's happening. Because I think we can talk about SGMA, we can talk about WaterFix, but unless they kind of understand the on-the-farm challenges that we have, I think that's where we can be really educational in the process.
Yeah, and what I was going to say about Vietnam, because I know that the Secretary and Josh, did any of others of you travel to Vietnam? That was not on that trip, though. My recent trip, we can talk more about at lunch, but what I wanted to share with you now, and Crystal and I talked a little bit last night with your significant years spent in Asia and China, the issue that you just raised about the quality of our regulation and the quality of our food here, every meal that I enjoyed, breakfast, lunch, and dinner and beyond in Vietnam, had this bounty of herbs and spices and fresh greens. And I didn't have a chance to explore as many farms as I'd wanted to, but there's a lot of urban farms, and a lot of that greenery comes from small farmers. And the anecdotal information that I got, as well as meeting with the chief policymaker for Vietnam in Hanoi, those greens are being doused with a lot of chemicals and a lot of inputs. And so here you have a population that prides itself on eating these remarkable greens. And so wherever I met, I just asked people, what do you know about this, and where do you source your produce? And I don't think it's well known, and I don't think it's sustainable. And I'm not sure what our role as a board or Californians is in that, but the awareness factor is huge, because you have a country like China where you spent a year. Yeah, and we talked last night about the difficulties in the food production.
This is so relevant because our last visit in Chile, they're focused on irrigation management and pesticide use to reduce inputs. And the challenges, which we all know, the challenges of connecting with small farmers, many, many small farmers over a broad landscape, and the huge need for technical assistance to make the education meaningful, and also the business case, which when the farmers, especially on pesticides, see that using less results in less costs, for business reasons they go there, but it's a huge challenge and continues to be a challenge across this country as well, to think that we've got all the answers. It's reaching so many very small operations, and we continue to cut technical assistance, and yet a lot of our grant programs, the first thing we do is build in money for technical assistance to make sure that small farmers are not left out of this ability to be the best operators they can be.
Interesting, Karen.
It's so interesting.
That does circle back to why these people were here earlier today.
Yes, exactly right. Well, the new emphasis on rural. New emphasis on rural. At the Economic Summit in San Diego in November, they are, for the next year, a significant focus is going to be on rural California. I think the elections last year woke people up that we've left, and being from a very rural area, it was forgotten then, and that was, decades ago.
Bryce, did you have a comment? Are you on?
Well, it just, as you brought us back to why the people were here today, and I have a sensitivity to their request, and I was wondering if you could give any clarification, Secretary Ross, on how their request and what they perceive as a threat to their livelihoods is interfacing, and whether or not it's
It's
as
very
direct as,
limited of what this is a public meeting, but I was able to assure the folks when they asked for this meeting that it was not done in a vacuum, that it was done at all levels. Our cannabis working group is intense, and it's all the agencies, and it's at the highest levels of government. And the EIR was done. EIRs are done to put in a variety of scenarios that seem the most likely, including what locals might do and what states might do. And EIR is just an analysis. It is not setting what will be the regulations. So there's been some understanding that what was in the EIR, regardless of what all the other scenarios were that were analyzed, would set the regulations. But there was a decision made late in our process about the clarity of the authority to do that. These are for the emergency regulations. Comments that were submitted to OAL, and in addition to the very public process that we will undertake for developing the permanent regulations, will be where people should and can weigh in. And if there's need for clarification and authority, I'm sure that will happen. But it involved the highest levels of all of government weighing in on what went forward as the emergency regs.
Many of the speakers had a impression that this board could have a role or listen to them and have an impact. Would you say that that is a misguided impression, or I mean, they came to speak to us today. Is that an area we would want to take action on, or would you say it's not appropriate for us to?
Well, certainly the board is an advisory to myself and to the governor's office, and if the board wanted to recommend that careful consideration be given within the authority of how the statute was drafted, that certainly is your prerogative to do.
And as staff, I would advise the board that the comment period has actually closed on that session, and I think there would be an opportunity for the emergency regulations. And I think just like the Secretary mentioned, that in the rulemaking process, there's definitely the opportunity for the board to kind of weigh in that process. I can find that out for the board. I don't know the specifics of when that process begins.
Ben?
So I think Dawn asked the right question on, when do you think you're going to have to, the larger growers are going to come in? And so I think, I'd love to be sitting knowing that, my importers that I'm competing against only can bring a certain amount of product in the United States to guarantee, that I'm going to have an income. And that's kind of the way I look at it. I believe in supply and demand. And, at some point in time, they're going to have to come to the reality that supply and demand has something to play on this. So, they've got to make that business decision. I can't make that for them.
I don't disagree with that, Ben, but I do think that changes in the regulatory process can bring kind of chaos or
disruption.
Yeah, disruption, and that there be a kind of an organized or kind of approach to it that keeps the disruption from being too significant. And I think that's what they were asking for. I'm not saying I have the right answer.
Well, and if I could add from a staff perspective, I think also where we always try to endeavor to hear the diversity of the issue, we do not have all kind of aspects of the issue kind of represented before the board. So I would advise, that's better to have other viewpoints if this is an area that the board wishes to take action on.
Just a question, Greg, because Governor mentioned last night the UN event. That's March? September. So the September meeting, whether we could, talking about the fact that we want to tell the world of the things that we know, maybe do a special event, a special panel, a special thing during that event with a couple of the very knowledgeable board members about soil things?
So there is a very extensive network of people working on this, and certainly we hope to have ag be a piece of this, as well as potential for side trips or side events. But it's a very extensive, intensive process right now. I think, Josh, I'm taking you to a meeting yet this week about it. So there's a lot going on, and since we have 190 plus countries that are part of the partnership, it's going to be very interesting. In San Francisco in September, which is a major convention time in the city to start.
Right.
Ben and Nancy.
So when we're talking about doing something like that, in September, isn't that when Cal Expo is going on here, the state fair?
No, they moved that to July.
Maybe we could do our July meeting somewhere, unless it's not a 2-day, is that the 2-day or in July?
It is.
Oh, never mind.
Nancy and Joy and Crystal and Andy.
I just want to let people know that the September conference already has a website up. It's very interesting, offers opportunity, excuse me, to see kind of the scope and to participate as individuals. So the website is already up and helpful.
And Nancy, thank you. This is wonderful that you provided this for all of us. It's a lot of reading. I've done a little of it, and it's fantastic. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry we didn't have Paul with us, but I figured if we can't have Paul, we can have his book.
Yeah. Joy?
I just wanted to say that I would, if Secretary Ross and Josh see any reason or need for this board's involvement in the forum, anything obviously we can do to help. You got strong help here.
Crystal?
I just wanted to support the comment that Bryce made about whether or not there is an opportunity for this board to weigh in on the emergency regulations or other regulations. I think there's an important concept here about redress that is really important. For communities, we are all, I think, recognizing that California is taking the lead around marijuana policy, partly as a way of helping this country recognize that we have had a failed war on drugs. Some communities, some individuals, some neighborhoods, some counties have been overtly oppressed by those laws, and that we ought to, in every way that we can in this state, in that leadership role, help to specifically redress those atrocities that happened. And so I think to the extent that we can ensure that these regulations can do as much of that as possible, it's not a level playing field. And we are trying to address that as much as we can. So I would certainly support this board being able to do that.
Well spoken. And Andy, final comment? Okay. Great. Good, I think. Oh, public comment. Oh. The most important part of our meeting.
I'll be very, very fast. First, as a retired state employee, the son of a state employee, the spouse of one, and the father of another, Karen Ross's work on Cal Cannabis has been nothing short of amazing. This is, and as the servant of two governors, the rollout is unprecedented, and it's historic. And like one governor once told me, if you're a good magician, nobody sees the magic but you. She deserves all the credit in the world. Secondly, Craig and I met a decade ago, and I've been privileged to know him ever since. And we went through a searing Board of Ag public hearing in Mendota during the beginning of the drought, when more than 300 people lined up to tell us their stories. And we've kind of been bonded ever since. And I appreciate your friendship, Craig. Good luck to you.
Thank you very much.
Now, last and very quickly, I'm Robert Gore from the Gualco Group on behalf of the Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency, the Modesto Irrigation District, Kings River Kern County Water, United Water, and the California Association of Wine Grape Growers. Let me add to your list, and I'll just walk through these fast. Oh, and also West Hills Community College in Coalinga, Lemoore, and Firebaugh. There is a farm bill. I'm working with the Farm Bureau and Western Growers and the Ag Council. It's in the very, very, very early stages, and I urge this board to be aggressively engaged in that. One area that I've advocated for is ag tech education and rural jobs of the future. West Hills College is home of the Farm of the Future. We're also home of a conference every year that's presented in association with Harris Farms, Paramount, Wolf, and a number of other organizations. And this year, we are working with the California Emerging Technology Fund to create a broadband pilot on the west side. Because without broadband, none of that ag tech works. We had Western Growers do a survey of their members. It's very timely because most of them say, well, I'm not really into tech now, but in the next 2 years, I have to be, mainly because of as you all know, the labor shortage. So I encourage you to get involved in both the Farm Bill and agricultural technology. Another avenue is the regulatory coherence. As the Secretary has pointed out several times, this board could be an aggressive arbiter for farmers. Right now, they have a historic regulatory burden that's not getting easier. And you might insert yourself in that discussion and say, you know what, we need to have some coherence. I am not saying streamlining or take anything away, but there is a way to reduce the cost of compliance and speed things up. On recharge is not easy. It is not done. It is hooked directly to recycling and also water rights. It's something that's worth your continuing intervention. Food waste. I have a food waste roundtable that Craig's a member of. It's a pro bono group. Cal Recycle is a member of it. They're about to start a regulation for food waste recycling that's diversion. It's extensive and they need your help, believe me. And banking is relevant now more than ever. I can tell you right now there's a national AML, it's anti-money laundering initiative among nonprofits and government organizations to enable cannabis banking, but it gets to a number of other things that are related to it. Finally, as the parent of 2 FFA students, one of whom used her background to survive a year in combat in Afghanistan, FFA education is worth, again, your attention because every single year, because of the urbanity of the legislature, it comes up for a budget reduction. So anyway, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you for your years of friendship, to me personally and to this board.
Okay.
All righty.
Okay, Mr. President.
Oh, my God. Oh, you finally got it right.
I call it chairman all the time. This side, please.
What's that?
This side. Well, of course, I have to do the resolution,
Oh, yeah. Usually we do this together.
which I'm going to read it. I'm just going to read it. You have to be patient. Honoring Craig McNamara for his leadership as president of the State Board of Food and Agriculture. Whereas Craig McNamara has served the agricultural industry of California with great distinction and dedication for more than 16 years on the California State Board of Food and Agriculture. Whereas Craig's leadership and vision as president of the California State Board of Agriculture for the last 7 years has earned the appreciation of our state's farmers and ranchers. And whereas Craig's tenure has addressed issues of great concern to the state's agricultural sector and has garnered attention at the local, state, and federal levels. And whereas Craig's dedication to agricultural sustainability, beginning farmers and the farm worker community, has elevated the visibility and admiration of the state board throughout California. And whereas Craig's leadership of the California agricultural vision continues the ongoing collaboration and engagement among the state's diverse agricultural interests for the betterment of the state's larger agricultural community. And whereas Craig fostered advancement of the agricultural community by addressing key issues important to stakeholders across the state and nation, and by pursuing a shared vision for solutions. And whereas Craig's colleagues and fellow board members,
We can do this together.
Respect and greatly appreciate the guidance and counsel that Craig has provided on primary issues impacting agriculture, and whereas Craig's legacy of leadership, dedication, and pride in California's farmers and ranchers and farm workers will continue to inform and empower the State Board of Food and Agriculture. Now therefore, be it proclaimed by the California Department of Food and Agriculture Secretary Karen Ross, that's me.
That's you.
That Craig McNamara is honored for his service on this day, Tuesday, December 5th.
Oh, Karen. Thank you, one and all.
And you're getting one of these nice
What is
copies.
that?
This is, I just discovered this from my friends from the California Native Plant Society. It's California's Botanical Landscapes, and it's a gorgeous, gorgeous
that's-
book.
what a
And just so you
resource.
know, I found this because I sat through a 3-hour meeting on my birthday with the governor, who wants to know everything there is to know about the plants that are on his ranch.
Because he wants to be planting
And
them.
so I asked the state board
Oh,
members
that's
to
so
sign up for you.
beautiful. How
And
wonderful.
of course, you can't retire as a chairman without getting president.
Thank you. What do you got here? In a box.
In a box.
It's got a bow. I have an idea what this is. It's something I've wanted for a while.
Sure.
Ah. It is. I wanted it. I think we banned it, didn't we?
I think something happened. I think it's how Al used to do it. but
Yeah.
you didn't.
Oh.
And then we lost it, right?
it's in the way of my office.
I got to tell you, these things mean so
I
much.
know, isn't
to
this
me.
nice? This is great.
And so these will all be on my desk. When you come out to the farm, you'll see all these things, and you're very welcome. And, you know, I've served 3 of yous, Secretaries of Agriculture, and 3 governors. There's nothing like you. There's just nothing like this board. And look at the diversity of us.
Yes.
And look at where we come from. It's fantastic. So, meeting is adjourned. Is this a new one? Because the old one was really beat up.
Okay. There it is.
Oh, that is so.
That's cool.
That
That's
is
very
so
cool.
cool.
Very nice.
Now, hold on, we go on with my camera? My wife always accuses me of whatever's on my camera never gets home. You'll never see it again.
Josh, you'll be sending us all our electronic mail copy of that.
Yes.
Of course. Okay, so, we're gonna, those of you who want to walk together. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, Josh, absolutely. There,
May I suggest the resolution in the picture? Oh, sure.
oh my God, we got so many items here.
Thank you. That's great.
Okay, so the plan now is to, those who want to walk over with me to the Sutter Club, those who want to drive, there is, oh, I can't see. With the secretary. We got plenty of time for photos and plenty. So those who want to drive, there's parking at the Sutter Club. You say you're with.
I'm just gonna walk.
Does anybody, so you, some people have bags. So you want, we could load some.
I would, and I'd be happy to walk.
Let's do it. Any other bags that want to come with